If you give them the illusion of choice, they think they're living in a freedom world where they've got some kind of influence. But believing that false reality means that they don't question as much as they should what's really going on. They don't dig deeper below the surface and see that really, you know, behind the scenes it's all about what's in it for them. Can they get more power? Can they get more money? Can they get more control? There is no short answer to that. How did I get into all this weird magic, hypnotism and all the related stuff? Because I kind of didn't have a choice. Obviously I did have a choice, but it felt like I didn't have a choice because I was born on, well, my parents were travelling with Gandhi Circus here in England, and subsequently at the age of 3 and a bit, I made my performance debut as Flap the Clown, at the time Britain's youngest paid circus clown. And then growing up, my mum demanded that I go to a normal school at a certain point rather than travelling around all the time. So that happened, and then I was just performing in school holidays, weekends and after school and stuff where it was possible with my dad. But it got to a point where I was getting bullied at school. I was the odd one out, and I was in the local papers. Well, actually I was in the national paper. I was in the Daily Mirror at the age of 6. Alex the Circus 6 hit, I think was the headline off the top of my head. And then that led to me getting bullied because I was perceived as the odd one out. So I really started to dislike being a clown, because in my head that was linked to the reason why I was getting bullied, and well, it was. But by that point, I guess you could say I developed an addiction to an audience clapping and the laughing at the right times, which is showing appreciation or love, you may say. And my dad was never really one for, he wasn't one of these, you know, he'd tell everyone else how wonderful I was, but never say it to me. So getting that appreciation from an audience clapping or laughing at the right times, it made me feel, it filled that gap that people sometimes say that they have, you know, I felt worthy.
The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organised habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are moulded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. And this is the logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organised.
So the world famous Magic Circle headquarters in London, England, it's the oldest magical society for conjuring magicians, as in entertainment type magicians, Paul Daniels, David Copperfield, Siegfried and Roy, that kind of thing. Although there is always a link with the occult meaning hidden. As you can see, they are the glyphs for the 12 star signs, which is quite ironic really, given that a lunar month is 28 days, and when you divide our construct of time, the calendar year, into 28 days, there should actually be 13 star signs. They always keep something hidden. If you search the internet, you'll see that myself, Jonathan Royle, I'm actually banned from the Magic Circle. I was supposed to lecture here, then people kicked up a stink, but that's an entirely different story. What this represents is secret societies, everything from the Magic Circle, entertainment, light-hearted side, to the Freemasons, Rosicrucians. There's all manner of secret societies around the world, but when you look at them all, they all have different levels to aspire to. What level are you at in the Masons? Are you a gold star member of the Magic Circle? Are you in the inner Magic Circle? It's about making people feel special, like they're better than people below them. They don't necessarily market it that way, but that's what it is. It's playing on people's ego, their need to feel special, their need to feel a sense of acceptance or power within, which is something at the end of the day is just a feeling. And feelings are non-existent. They're just what you imagine in your mind, what you then allow yourself to feel. You can program yourself positively to feel good. Unfortunately, society as a whole, from secret societies to religion to politics, the world in general is geared to make you feel inferior so that you aspire to be something more, but having to bow down to authority figures like the Council of the Magic Circle, who will throw you out if you don't follow the rules. It's the same with all these clubs and societies. Hierarchies of power to control people below and keeping bits of information on a need-to-know basis.
However, it goes all the way to the top of power echelons around the world, to things like Bohemian Grove in America, where once a year world leaders meet up. And if you search Bohemian Grove and the owl, they have this owl kind of statue. Now, obviously the powers that be, who've ever been confronted and ever spoken about this, people who attend, world leaders, presidents, politicians, banking founders, or, you know, I mean, really the people at the top of the tree, they tend to say that no, we have this ritual, yes, but it's you know, it's a dummy that's used, and it may well be. Now that we live in a more media savvy age. But interestingly, if you search on YouTube for Bohemian Grove, you will find videos of someone who managed to get their way in there, and at the very least it will raise some very odd questions in your mind, and you'll think, hang on, why are these world leaders, people we're trusting to run our country, taking part in what to an outsider looks very much like satanic ritual abuse ceremonies?
People would say something like, oh, the Masons control the world, for example, something like that. I don't know whether that's true. I personally would imagine that something like the Masons is testing ground, is to see if we're on the same page, is to use a yes minister analogy, is to see if he's sound. You've got to go through these, we'll test you, we'll ask you this question to see if you're on the same page, to see if you're a company man, to see if you've got the best interests of all of us at heart. And basically is whether that ties into that particular ideology that they're presenting.
So behind me you can see the United Grand Lodge of the Freemasons. Yes, those of the funny handshake stereotypically, the secret society. I urge you to research not just the Masons, which is like kind of the UK secret society, but does go around the world, but also things like the Bilderberg group in America. The Masons, some say that they have 33 degrees or 33 levels. Why 33? Well, it's 3 and 3 twice. The power of 3. You have the conscious mind, the unconscious stroke subconscious, and the superconscious or universal consciousness, group mentality. The power of 3 is like triangles have 3 sides. The pyramids have 3 sides. The secrets are there if you look. The thing to research is sacred geometry. Research sacred geometry and you'll see the magic power of 3. Repetition, when you see politicians making speeches, they will say what they're going to say, they'll say it, then they'll repeat what they've said. This is because your conscious picks up on it, then your critical faculty analytical area gets bored the second time and kind of goes to sleep, so the third time it goes directly into your computer bank as a suggestion or a command. The secret rituals galore take place it's kind of all abstract because it's power on the unconscious mind, and it's also about people feeling that they belong to something powerful, and yet there's always somebody above them, that they aspire to get up those levels, and of course they help each other. You know, there's those old stories that if somebody gets done for something, police might turn a blind eye if indeed it's a fellow brother of the Masons.
You have to ask the questions, what if? You have to investigate. Don't take anything as read, it's really important. There's a reason these things get termed as secret societies, because there is secrets there.
So any money I was earning, I was spending on the magic tricks that were available, and I very quickly developed a liking for being able to do tricks, and because when I did tricks, people were like, wow, that's amazing. You get the applause. Sometimes you get laughs of astonishment or gasps of astonishment or the look of bewilderment on people's faces, and that provided that need of performing. But I wasn't wearing the clown makeup stuff, so it was like, ha ha ha, you know, I was, in my head, I'm rebelling against what my dad wanted me to do. And truth, really, I'm just performing in a different way. And you know, I got daft little tricks when I was young. You know, I mean, little daft things. You might get like, it's how old people start, a little silk, and we kind of just keep poking it into the hand. So you can see that it's definitely just being poked in all the time by the same finger, and lo and behold, daft little things, but you know, people enjoyed seeing them, and it led to me learning more and more about sleight of hand, and I learned that involved within magic was also psychological techniques to distract people's attention and stuff. So I started doing magic and stuff, but I was getting attention in the local media and regional media for doing my magic shows, and I was still getting bullied at school. It just transferred into magic being the reason why I got bullied, because I was performing. So I got very depressed, and all my time when I wasn't in school, I was either performing or I was learning magic, sleight of hand or other techniques, and I don't remember exactly how young I was, but I know I remember that I was at primary school, but just about to go to the bigger school. And one day on Queen's Park Road, which was the big main road in Haywood, one evening I went and lay down in the road when it was pretty dark, figuring I'd probably get run over, and that would end everything, pain. But what seemed like bloody ages, to the point of boredom, thinking, oh, sod this, stand up, walk back, and just as I got to the pavement, suddenly traffic whirred past. It was probably only a matter of seconds, but it felt like forever. So we're in Canary Wharf, kind of the business centre, or at least one of them in London. Behind me is the HSBC bank headquarters here in England. There's a lot of other banks around here. Just using them as an example, one of the easiest you'll find when you go on the internet and research HSBC banking scandals. You can do that with other banking institutes as well, and I encourage you to do so. Further, I encourage you to look into fractional reserve banking and the fact that banks are allowed to lend out several times more than they've actually got in terms of reserves in their bank. So if everyone in a bank demanded their money to be withdrawn on the same day, the banks will collapse because they actually don't have that much money. They've lent out more than actually exists, and as we'll talk about elsewhere, money is just an illusion, which if you search that on YouTube, you'll learn all this "I promise to pay the bearer on demand" the sum of. It means that that isn't really a £20 note, it's a promise to give you £20 worth of gold, it was at one time, but as I say, they're lending out more than they've actually got to pay out, so it's all an illusion.
And it's about keeping people suppressed and not having the power or freedom or finance to move forward. But we've been led to believe that money is a sign of what our worth is. That, you know, what you get paid is a sign of how good you are, and therefore the better you get a job or the more you get promoted, the more you get paid. So people have been conditioned to the idea that if you get paid more, you're worth more. That said, I can tell you that some of the most unhappiest, insecure individuals I've met in the world in my work as a hypnotherapist have actually been multimillionaires. So this rubbish about money is the answer to all problems, it isn't actually. And lots of people with money, even the ones who are prepared for it, spend their time worrying about not losing it, so that their mind's so taken up with that and doing things to stop themselves from losing the money that they're in a sense of fear, if you like, in that fight, flight and freeze. They're in the freeze of, I don't want to lose this, I can't afford to lose this lifestyle, that they then get so stressed out that they turn to drugs or alcohol or other addictions, or they just take their eye off the ball and everything ends up collapsing quite often. You hear this story again and again. One of the Rothschilds family, who own banking, not all banking, but they're one of the big, you've got your Rockefellers, your Rothschilds and such like, research the quote, and you'll find sites that say he never said this, but you'll find evidence that he did. And he said, "Let me control the money, and I care not who writes the law." In other words, whoever's got the most money has got more power than who writes the law, which is why when we spoke about the legal system, we've illustrated that when you do your research, you see that quite often it's not about who's right or wrong, it's about who's got the most money to pay for the best lawyers that often wins in a court case. Things are set up for you to default. They want you to default almost. That's why they chuck credit at people at certain times. They'll have a period where they chuck credit at people easily because they want people to end up defaulting down the line, so that they can take the properties off them. It's about people at the top becoming the richest landowners again. Well, they are the richest landowners, but it's about taking back even more control. All roads lead back to what's in it for the person who stands to make money. And if they stand to make money on any level, then the chances are they've not got your best interest at heart.
Scotland Yard, the Met Police, the headquarters here in England of the police force. They're supposed to be peace officers, serving and protecting. But in truth, really, they're there to carry out the orders of the powers that be above and to keep you and me under control. Yes, there's this facade that it's about investigating crime and stuff. Unfortunately, when you start digging, you see a lot of police corruption. For example, I know myself investigating Rupert Murdoch's fake sheikh, Mazza Mahmood, has bragged about having bent police officers in his pocket. He bragged about having bent police officers inside the Met Police, Scotland Yard. And that begs the question of what control or influence he could exert on behalf of his paymaster, Rupert Murdoch, who through his media follows the demands and commands of the powers that be that are above to brainwash and control the mass populace. So you think they're there to serve and protect, and many are, they don't realise the bigger agenda, but people in key positions are there to keep that control and to keep people in a sense of fear. It's supposed to be a sense of security, but we know there's less and less police officers on the streets, and now people are demanding that there'll be more on the street. But as a result, we're getting more and more CCTV, we're getting more and more surveillance. It's turning into George Orwell's 1984. It is turning into Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. It's unfolding as reality. They are not works, well, they were published as works of fiction, but sadly and scaringly, day by day, they're becoming works of reality.
The thing that really comes to mind that I want you to be aware of and think about right now in terms of Scotland Yard is, take the name example of Daniel Morgan. This is in England, the most investigated murder in British history. Unfortunately, it's the least successful most investigated murder in British history because nobody has been convicted of the murder yet. But as you can see on my website, circusofthemind.net, there's evidence that links the names of Rupert Murdoch, the media mogul's former employee, Mazza Mahmood, the fake sheikh, is linked to a company called Southern Investigations, a private investigation firm, that have been provably shown to have had corrupt links with high-ranking police officers and inspectors, and some would argue people formally positioned within Scotland Yard. Come to your own conclusions, check your own links, but it's interesting to note quite often how many people involved in these things, especially high-ranking officers, end up being able to be shown as being members of the Freemasons, the secret society. They have the secret handshake, as it were, and they're different levels of secrecy, and the more you rise up the ranks, the more you learn the truth about what's going on, and the more you also end up in a position where you're compromised. You will soon learn that although in some contexts these people are apparently there to protect us, that it does seem quite often there to protect the people who are truly powerful, the money people, the people behind the media and such like.
Another thing I want you to think about is this, the Magna Carta, common law. The Magna Carta, common law, which basically means that as long as you treat people the way you'd expect to be treated yourself and do not physically, emotionally, psychologically harm them in any way, then effectively a lot of so-called statute laws don't apply, because the Magna Carta is supposed to overrule that. Now, if a policeman ever asks you, do you understand? Remember this, the legal language is called legalese. It's completely different than what you think words mean in a normal dictionary. So you think you're answering, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but no. In legalese, when you say, yes, I understand, you're actually saying, yes, I stand under you. In other words, you're saying, I am obeying your authority. The moment you say that, you have consented to abide by their rules. The only rules you should be following are common law, the Magna Carta, and therefore, rather than saying you understand, say, yeah, I fully comprehend the question you've just asked me. Never say you understand. So we're all products of our environment, and as Sigmund Freud, or Sigmund Freud as many people know, often said, our formative years, which is 0 to 7, as children we're like sponges, because we are in the theta state, theta being hypnosis, where everything just goes in, and that's how we learn from our environment. And that's why in certain religions there's this saying, give me the child and I'll show you the man. Or, if you give me the child to the age of 7, they will be part of this religion for life. Because if the strong conditioning is 0 to 7, and it's about emotions, it's about reactions to what you see around you, and sadly that then ends up in your unconscious mind. It's like your personal neck-top computer, and that's the programs that are running. And you see, If those programs have elements of negativity in, or lack of self-belief, or things you may have been told you weren't worthwhile or you didn't deserve that, you'll be running programs in the back of your mind that are saying you don't deserve that, you're not worthwhile, which will self-sabotage you from achieving certain things. However much you tell yourself consciously you can achieve this, the computer itself will be running a program that sabotages that. And the powers that be know that. The more they can control the environment, what's going on, cause stress in life as people are growing up, even through education and fear of, you know, getting told off by teachers, the more people become malleable. The British Psychological Society, the Tavistock Institute. Two signs hidden on a back street of London.
I mean, the Tavistock Institute basically started as the Tavistock Clinic. It was during the First World War by a gentleman called Hugh Crichton Miller, and what they were trying to do was help soldiers that were suffering from shell shock, or what we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder. And with people like John Rawlings Rees, they basically started to look at ways of getting people out of this trauma, but also seeing how trauma actually affected people. And what's horrible is that basically with all of these things, despite the sort of the certain medical benefits, they will take the opposite data and they will use that themselves. And they started to realize that essentially trauma has an incredibly effective way, is an incredibly effective way of manipulating people. If you put people into a traumatic state, then they go into fight or flight, and they often look for an authority figure to make things better. This is just human instinct. And what they basically decided through a gentleman called Kurt Lewin, who was there in the 30s, was that the best way to control society was to input elements of trauma from an exterior point constantly. Now, trauma doesn't have to be something like a terrorist attack or anything. It can literally be like uncertainty about your job, or about the price of food, or about, you know, anything that can cause any stress or worry inside you. And what they found was that basically the best way to control populations was to keep them constantly at a sort of humming level of trauma. If possible, to try and reduce them to a blank state, which Lewin called a tabula rasa, and then you can essentially fill that in themselves. Remember, we were talking about the concept of the manufacturing of consent and painting pictures inside people's heads, telling them how the world is and how to react to the world. If you could do that, then essentially, you know, you can control them. If you've got a sort of, you know how someone will react to a certain stimuli, then you can base your reactions on their reactions.
The Tavistock Institute and the British Psychological Society on a back street in London, in the middle of nowhere apparently, seems all very innocent until you go searching and you look at the Tavistock Hospital many years ago, which was the precursor to the Tavistock Institute. And it's no coincidence that it's in the same building as the British Psychological Society, that are linked in with psychiatrists, DSM-5 and earlier versions, which is all about medicating people with drugs for apparently mental illness. The truth is, it's all about medicating people, keeping them under the control. And if you look back, you'll see that the Tavistock Hospital has links to MK Ultra, the mind control experiments that were done linked to the CIA in America. And that linked into that, believe it or not, and check this for yourself, is Joseph Mengele, who committed those atrocious experiments on people in Nazi camps in Germany, and then was smuggled to America and worked for the CIA and MK Ultra. Now in this present day, it becomes the British Psychological Society, looks innocent and fair. It becomes the Tavistock Institute, where in actual fact it's still about brainwashing, mind control and social engineering.
They promoted a concept called social turbulence. Social turbulence is essentially taking that concept to the nth degree, creating constant crises within society, creating constant trauma within the members of that society, so that they're overwhelmed. The other thing that they did was they sent out what were called shock troops. Now, shock troops were essentially, you know, troops to proliferate this concept of trauma and to add to the future shock that was going on. And these were sent out to various institutions around the world, Kurt Lewin himself actually helped start MIT and Stanford Research Institute, and was on the board of the National Institute for Mental Health and various Esalen and the Wharton School of Economics, and various sort of massive institutions within America, for example. And so by influencing and infiltrating these institutions and these companies at the top level, then this concept of trauma, introducing fluidity in society that Kurt Lewin wanted to promote, it's not only coming from the sort of psychological aspects, it's being spread out into the sort of more broader aspects of society, where it can actually have an effect, and it can utilize that mechanism to alter your perception and to alter your belief structure.
In terms of why do I keep doing this kind of hypnosis, mind magic, all the psychological kind of stuff? Why? Well, one element is, you know, I've got a family and a daughter to provide for, so it earns money, and frankly I couldn't see myself ever working for anyone. Because, you know, I like the freedom of being able to do what I want, when I want. So, yeah, an element's obviously the natural thing of life, having to pay the bills. It is very rewarding to see somebody whose life's been held back in some manner through anxiety or having an addiction, overcoming that. Quite often when I see a therapy client, and I often teach people that, you know, I don't cure that person's phobia, they do, and it's in a matter of seconds when they walk through my office door. Because when they walk through that office door, they're leaving behind all blame, shame, guilt and regret. Could you see, if they just woke up one day and said, I'm no longer going to see spiders when they run across the room and start crying like a baby, I'm just not going to do that anymore. They're fully capable of doing that, but if they were suddenly to do that, the family and friends and loved ones who knew them as the spider phobic would go, what's happened? And if they said, well, I just decided to stop doing it, people would say, well, why didn't you do that sooner, you fool? And that would make them feel shame, blame, regret, daft. So even if they did try that, they would relapse to prove that it wasn't that simple, and they'd go back to that problem. That's quite often why relapses occur. Whereas if they go and see a therapist, after they've gone through an important seeming ritualistic process, attached importance to it by paying money, for example, when they leave and they make those changes for themselves, which they always could have done, if people say to them, why didn't you do it sooner? They can go, well, I tried, but it wasn't that simple. But fortunately, I found this therapist, and you know what? Now it's become ridiculously easy for me to change my life. But that removes all self-blame, shame, guilt and regret from them. They're not to blame, they needed that help, and that person worked some kind of magic or process for them.
Now don't get me wrong, hospitals are great things, and especially because if you were to break a bone, let's say, I would advise you go to a hospital. It will eventually heal itself, but not necessarily in the direction you'd want it to. So medical help does come in, so don't get me wrong in that regard. However, hospitals have a vested interest in making you physically well so that you can be there and perhaps have to have follow-up medication, sometimes for life, because medical industry, and it is an industry, make no mistake, generally speaking, is more concerned about making customers than cures, because drug companies can then keep prescribing stuff, selling stuff and making profits. It's the same thing with the big C cancer. They're never going to release a cure if they found one. Why would they? It would then mean that there no longer be any need for research, and things like cancer research, as a so-called charity organisation, makes multi-millions of pounds profit for the people at the very top that are involved. It's all an illusion of truth, where in truth, you know, you see the places that they're apparently there to help, and to a degree they are, but then there's the bigger picture that, you know, drugs, people with mental health or get labelled with mental health issues get put on antidepressants. And if you read a book, for example, like The Emperor's New Drugs by Irving Kirsch, you'll see that he's done a meta-analysis of all the studies that were done on antidepressant drugs, and the conclusion is that they're either just about the same effectiveness as a placebo, or in many cases the placebo actually works better and has no chemical side effects. But of course the placebo and the power of your mind doesn't make profits for the powers that be.
The drug industry and the medical industry are not in the business of creating or giving cures. They're actually in the business of creating customers. Because if you were to create a cure for something, once the person's cured, you can't make any more money out of them. And unfortunately, for example, cancer is a multi-million and millions of pounds business for the drug companies, for the producers of chemotherapy and stuff. And there are studies out there, and in fact people who used to work in the medical industry who've now retired, if you go searching, who've now kind of turned whistleblower and openly say that more people die of chemotherapy effectively than they actually do of cancer. Look at the history of medicine, conventional medicine, what people consider to be the, you know, respectable and real. Look at the history of conventional medicine, and you're actually looking at the history of the placebo effect. In other words, and as a hypnotist I use the placebo a heck of a lot, because hypnosis is purely suggestion and suggestion is placebo. They're one and the same thing. Essentially, all conventional medicine, all medicine of any form, is largely a placebo effect. Now, I'm not saying that when you break your leg and it gets put in plaster that it's the placebo effect that knits the bone back together. Of course it's not. It's the way the body naturally heals that does that. However, the placebo effect and positive thinking can help you recover more rapidly and quickly. That's why, for example, sports people use hypnosis and similar techniques. Mind over matter truly does exist. Unfortunately, that doesn't make money for drug companies and pharmaceutical companies. And if more people were told the truth of how reprogramming their personal neck-top computer and kind of installing antivirus software for the mind, because your mind does control your body, and you've only got to look at the works of the likes of Dr. Bruce Lipton, the author of The Biology of Belief, who is one of the leading lights in the world of epigenetics, and he's a cellular biologist, and he's finally come to the conclusion and published proof and evidence and studies that through mind power alone, reprogramming our personal neck-top computer, we can actually cause cellular genetic change in the body. And yes, he does go into details that that could mean that mentally, possibly you could imagine yourself, for example, see a field of rabbits that represent your mind and body, and that they are going along and they are pulling up and getting rid of all these cancer carrots from the field, so it only leaves healthy carrots that are growing. And that this visualization, used ideally with hypnosis or a state that puts you into a theta state of mind, which is hypnosis that we've talked about elsewhere in the documentary, can actually cause a knock-on, because the unconscious, subconscious mind works in abstract images. So you take that abstract image and could actually cause your body to fight in a manner where you produce more of the blood cells you need to and kill off the negative stuff. And studies have been done to show that this actually genuinely can help cancer patients. Do some research, find out for yourself, follow the money. You know, there is no way on this planet. Imagine this, tomorrow a cure was found for cancer, a real one that was guaranteed to work 100%, or as near as can be. Immediately, cancer research is out of business. Do some research and look at how many millions of pounds the directors at the top of organisations such as that are making. Is it really in their interests for a cure to be found? What are they going to do if a cure was found? There's no reason to raise any more money anymore, and therefore there's no money coming in, so there's nothing to pay them their millions of pounds. Do the research. Follow the money. They're creating customers, not cures.
Well, this is where the red carpet gets put out sometimes, or quite regularly in Leicester Square, London. Cinema, films, it's another area. There's a whole Hollywood sexual abuse scandal to look into on the internet, and we'll mention that later. But also it's the fact that films absorb you. You look at the big screen, you almost become involved in it, and that puts you in the theatre state.
Now, where entertainment gets into sort of, again, this sort of what we call a manufacturing of consent is where you're getting things like Transformers movies and X-Men movies and stuff like that, which on the face of it is just, you know, entertainment, it's trite, it's tittle-tattle, who cares, it's just purely for a little bit of escapist fun. And it really isn't a lot of the time, because essentially there's a clause within Hollywood that is to do with the CIA's liaison office that suggests that essentially you can borrow or you can use machinery from the Department of Defense and the US military, tanks, planes, aircraft carriers, whatever, at an incredibly low rate, on the assumption that you let the CIA liaison office have final say on the script. So essentially they're not going to let you do anything that's going to have a negative effect on the promotion of American foreign policy or the American military. In fact, what they want to do is they want to use something like Iron Man or the Transformers movies as a way of making the military look pretty cool. So actually it's a very, very subtle recruitment tool. In the way that Ivy Lee or Edward Bernays would use newspaper articles that were essentially, oh, this is just a story, but it happens to be promoting a particular product. That's exactly the same way, and it's basically promoting the product, which is the US military, but it's hidden and embedded behind Transformers. So all you're seeing is, wow, look at these explosions, wow, look at that cool helicopter. And the opposite is true. Basically, you'll get films where essentially they refuse to let the CIA or the Department of Defense have a rewrite, and so they aren't allowed to use their equipment, and they have to go elsewhere, and the production becomes far, far more expensive and complicated.
King's Cross, London, world famous thanks to the Harry Potter books and films, thanks to J.K. Rowling, the struggling writer who got rejected so many times, and then wonderful fairy tale, she lands a deal and it becomes probably the best-selling book in history, with this exception of the Bible, another work of fiction, but that's an entirely different story. What we can learn from this is quite simple. People as a mass populace are looking for a secret, they're looking for hope, they're looking for the solution, they're looking to fill a gap inside themselves. It's like everyone deep down knows there's something more. Deep down, you know you don't have to listen to these so-called powers that be. Deep down, you know politics is a sham, religion's a sham, the whole control system's a sham. But most people are so scared of doing something different and stepping outside of the group that's why they love reading things like Harry Potter. Harry Potter's the outsider, but he's got these magical powers, and he appears to be able to, you know, fight and save Hogwarts and all the other wonderful things that happen. And people reading that, it resonates inside them, that feeling that they wish they could do something different. They wish they could work magic to make changes.
A lot of clients in hypnotherapy will be sort of skeptical or worried that they won't be able to be induced into trance, or that they'll be able to resist it, and the therapy won't work. And so what I always do is I say, well, have you ever cried at a film? And 9 times out of 10 they'll actually say yes, they've cried at a film, and obviously some people will be, you know, macho and say no. The point is that if you've cried at a film, it means that you are susceptible to hypnotism. What happens is that you allow the suggestion of the reality conveyed by the film to actually affect you on an emotional level. You know that that's not actually happening. You know that whoever is not really dead, but you go along with that idea, and it affects your subconscious and it affects your emotional reaction to what is being portrayed to you on the screen. And the second thing that I would always say to people is that we don't actually hypnotize you as a hypnotherapist or a hypnotist. What we do is we provide the scenario that allows you to easily make yourself go into a hypnotic state or into a trance state. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by creating a relaxing atmosphere and through repetition. And this is how people go into a hypnotic state, watching television and watching films. People used to think it was the flicker rate, and it's not the flicker rate on the television as such, it's the learned repetitive action of being in a relaxed state and giving yourself over to another person who's going to impart information onto you.
So we're entering the area of entertainment, theatres, or you could say entertainment or distractions, escapism from everyday life. Just like the television in the corner of your room providing escape from everyday life. So you get addicted to going and spending money on those things without then looking at perhaps more important things in life that you should be looking at if you weren't being distracted by all the messages coming from the powers that be.
Now, in the West End, you get musicals, yeah. You also get plays. Now and again, you get variety entertainment. That element doesn't really matter too much. Again, Leicester Square, it's films. It's more, you know, pre-recorded rather than live. But what they all have in common is that, as an outsider looking at a distance, this is a world of glitz and glamour. It's a world of look at what you could aspire to. It's on one level. It's a world of giving people hopes and dreams. But deep down, people do have that little desire, the majority of people, that they want. You know, when we were young, a lot of people went, oh, I want to be a pop star or a spaceman. And that dream dies as they grow up, and it gets knocked out of them. Through schooling and perhaps teachers going, that's ridiculous, you think you could be a superstar. But some people do make it, and if you start to scrape away at the facade of the bright lights, the razzle dazzle, the showbiz veneer, under the surface is a very dark world.
I've told you guys before, and I've told Rich that we've done podcasts about when I met different people in the industry and stuff, and we went in and met Max Clifford for one, and it was extraordinary. He was saying, like, you know, what we can do with you, and we'll get you spotted at this restaurant with this woman. And I was in a relationship at the time with my ex-wife, and saying, would she mind if you were photographed with another woman, like coming out of this, like the Ivy or whatever, because then we can manipulate it. And what I'll do is I'll then get a established woman on my books. I'll give this newspaper an exclusive for her based on the fact that they come and take photos of you, and who's this guy that's with Kate Moss, or do you know this nonsense? Oh my god, man, it's madness. It's just bullshit, isn't it?
And if you look at like the big celebrities now, like who's the big famous people, who's the big, you know, you've got your American footballers, you've got your footballers, you've got your actors and actresses, you've got your singers and stuff like that. There's across every demographic, there's celebrities, fashion, whatever. It always tends to be the musicians, giving it the eye symbols, giving it the Illuminati symbols in videos and stuff like that. It tends to always be the musicians. So I think it does have. I think they've invested a little bit more in that medium.
But yeah, change your name and you can have the marketing budget that you need to release an album. And it's like, no.
So why did they want you to change your name?
Because they just wanted to disassociate with my old man.
It simply was because of that? Like,
yeah, 100%, yeah. And the thing is, like I said to you before when we were chatting, like, I thought the original reason they wanted me to change my name is because, you know, ICKE, okay, I'd say that, I get called Icke, I get called Icke, Ick, whatever, do you know what I mean? And I thought maybe they were thinking in terms of marketing this lad, if people can't say his name, word of mouth isn't really going to spread because who are you talking about?
Yeah.
And if that had been the reason, do you know what, I'd have probably gone with a band name.
Yeah, yeah.
Like an Aqualung or like a Badly Drawn Boy who were just solo artists but under a band name. But as soon as it was made clear that no, that's not the reason is blah blah blah, then I was like, nah, that's me out.
Anyone's not going to find out if it's Gareth Icke.
Well, that was the other thing.
It's ridiculous.
That was the other thing. And when that was said, it then obviously then evolved from just change your name to disassociate. So if people do link the two of you, then you just disassociate.
What are you doing? Why would you do that?
It came out of this ball bag.
Was it not this size?
No, but how did you do that?
Religion, the belief in, sorry to offend, but a non-existent, invisible God. It doesn't matter what the religion is, at the end of the day, gods, religious deities, just like hypnosis, exist only in the mind of the believer. It only has power if you allow it to. St Paul's Cathedral, London, big grand building, incredibly expensive to build. Quite often these are the Church of England, for example, are one of the biggest landowners in the world. The Catholic Church, look at the Vatican, it's a city in itself with its own laws. It's all about control. Once again, sounds like I repeat myself numerous times during this documentary. That's because there's a consistent thread of power, control, and making people believe that to be a good person, they've got to, you know, follow what God's teachings or whatever the particular religious deity's name may be. If you follow their teachings, then that apparently makes you a good person, but if you don't, you're an outsider. It's about dividing and conquering. And the whole creation of hell, for example, is a fiction to incite fear into people. False evidence against reality, false evidence appearing real. It's about making people feel a sense of shame and guilt if they've done things that aren't in the good book or the religious Bible or whatever teachings they may be following. It doesn't matter what label or name it's given. At the end of the day, it's all about making people believe something that they have to follow. Where the truth is, there's only one thing you should follow, and that's your gut instinct. There should be one aim in life. The Magna Carta, common law, kind of sums it up as treat one another the way you'd expect to be treated yourself. Do nobody any harm, spiritually, emotionally, physically, or psychologically, and ultimately that should be all we need to do. And if everyone followed those simple rules, the world would be a far better place.
Christopher Hitchens once said that you need religion to make good people do wicked things. And you don't need religion, you need a cause. And that cause could be anything. Like, literally, that cause could be anything. You'd be surprised. I mean, just looking at sort of conformity tests and things like this, like the Milgram electricity experiment, where people were coerced to electrocute people if the responsibility of that death was taken away from them. Or look at things like the Solomon Asch experiments, where people drew 3 different lines on a different length lines on a board, and because they were all in on it, they all claimed, yeah, they're all the same length, until the one subject basically went along with the consensus because he didn't want to look stupid, and he went against his own senses in order to go along with the crowd, because that's the safe psychological position to be in.
You can make them do things that would contradict the morals and the values by framing it in a way where they think it fits with their morals and values, and that's what religion does. If you can brainwash somebody or condition them, indoctrinate them through religious teachings to believe that doing X, Y, and Z is vital to believing in their God, their saviour, then to do anything the other way against it is seen as being bad. And you know, as a former religious minister admitted, he said, hell is just a construct invented by the church to instill fear into people, to create disorientation and confusion, to knock them in that freeze theta state where they're hypnotized and highly suggestible, so they're under control and easily more manipulated. The majority of religions have something called tithing or similar, which means to give at least 10% of all your earnings to the church. That's why the Catholic Church are the richest landowners in the world. Some religions, the Church of Scientology, encourage you to give practically all your money to the church. Follow the money, as I say in other parts of the documentary. These people haven't got your best interest at heart when they want you to give all your money to them, especially when you're barely struggling to pay your mortgage yourself. Then you've got people who cash in on religions, well, they all do, but cash in more blatantly, like Benny Hinn, the American evangelical preacher. Just search YouTube for Benny Hinn, and you'll see him throwing people on the floor or flicking his jacket and them falling over. This is nothing more than a hypnotic induction process, a mass hysteria dressed up as alleged religion where people spend a fortune thinking they're going to get cured, and some of them do end up feeling better, but that's thanks to the placebo effect.
Well, for example, one of the things that you see is at an evangelical church, like if you see one of these guys like Benny Hinn or one of these people, the first thing you notice is these shows are incredibly long, like 3-4 hours sometimes, very, very long. And for the whole time you stood, because he's told you to stood up and participate in the show, and you've also got your hands up in the air like this. Now, that's because obviously you're praising Jesus or whatever. But the real reason for that is that essentially it's a stress position. You know, it's wearing your muscles. You're stood up, so it's hurting your legs and your back, and you're raising your arms, so it's hurting that. What they'll also do is you'll notice that there'll be constant music or somebody singing in the background. There'll usually be a choir on stage that are singing. And to the untrained eye, this is just to support the and to enhance the sermon that's being told and to make it more dramatic. But what this is actually doing is it's filling the finite bandwidth, if you will, of your brain. This is a technique that's used in supermarkets as well. This is why they have sort of music playing. It's because if you have less of your thinking capacity going on, or a certain amount of your thinking capacity filled by something else, then your critical thinking is reduced and you might fall prey to other advertising techniques. How this works in the church is in exactly the same way. You're in a stress position, the music's happening, you're repeating certain mantras. You're also part of a group, which is very psychologically comforting. It makes you feel protected. It's like being a fish in a shoal, as opposed to like in a school, as opposed to one alone. And you feel protected by the masses. But also what that does is it causes a sensation or a psychological phenomenon called de-individuation, where essentially you start to take on, to be accepted by the group, you start to take on the mannerisms and the ideologies of the group, to the point where basically you will act as one.
Religions are like everything else, a control system to make you do what other people want you to do.
Read about it! Extra! Please grab young fella, extra, extra! Read all about it! Life story of Playboy Penny, extra, extra! Extra, extra!
So I'd been getting publicity throughout my life, and as a course of that I realised that, generally speaking, it didn't matter whether it was regional, national, international press. The truth was not as important to them as selling papers or a good story. You know, I'd perhaps give them a story, and when it went to print, I'm supposed to have said things that I never said. I'm supposed to have done miraculous things that I'd never done. When Princess Diana, the late Princess Diana, was seeing Dodi Fayed, the son of the Harrods boss, I, under the name Nigel Brown, apparently put a paper bag on my head with eyes in and a mouth hole and said it was a protest, Princess Diana seeing Dodi Fayed, and I would not take the paper bag off my head until she left Dodi Fayed. And the Daily Sport national newspaper in England ran this as front page news practically every day for a couple of weeks, and it also led to TV and radio interviews. Newspapers are about headlines so they can sell more newspapers. They actually don't really care for the truth, despite what they might say to try and appeal to it. They don't. It's about making money, and on all the levels it's about manipulation and mind control and brainwashing, social conditioning for whatever agenda their bosses have been told to follow.
Number 1, London Bridge, London. Search it on the internet and you'll find that it's the offices of News UK, formerly News International, the London HQ for Rupert Murdoch's media publications. And as we discuss in this documentary, Rupert Murdoch is one of a few media moguls who, between a handful of them, control the world's television stations, radio stations, newspapers, magazines, even these days internet websites, to control the information that you see, to control the narrative and message. But you see, they will own publications of two types. They'll own things that will push one political agenda, and they'll also own others that push another, because it's about dividing and conquering. It is about controlling that disorientation and confusion and scaremongering, creating fear. That's why there's that saying in the news industry of, if it bleeds, it leads. Atrocities, terrorism attacks, murders, they make front page news, not the great news that's happening every day in the world. It's bad news that sells, and also it's bad news that incites fear into people and holds them back in life and makes them look up at the authority figures and say, please keep me safe. Another thing that's worth mentioning is Rupert Murdoch has backed every winning Prime Minister in British history for decades. In other words, he controls, on behalf of his puppet masters above him, the money people, what is put out to brainwash you, the mass populace, so that you vote on the people they want. Politics is just an illusion of choice. That's why they change the narrative in the press, to make you do what they want, to make you think what they want.
So then I'd heard about, and I'd been seeing stories in the News of the Screws, or the News of the World as it was called, a Sunday newspaper in England, run by Rupert Murdoch, who's known worldwide, a media mogul, and he had this newspaper, News of the World, and one of its journalists was called Mazza Mahmood. He was also known as the Fake Sheikh. He was dubbed as that because he used to dress up as an oil sheikh and convince celebrities and royalty that he wanted to offer them a part in films or TV shows or whatever, but then it was suggested that they get some cocaine for him or something, and it was implied that by doing that they were guaranteed the job. That's a very simplistic explanation. There was a lot more going on behind the scenes. Intimidation, people who posed as his bodyguards would, when he wasn't around, say, you know, if you upset him, and they'd imply that you could come to harm. And I wanted to expose this because I thought that then that would make a great story to go to a rival news company, one that wasn't a Murdoch paper. Now, to make this clear, it was March 1998 when I started this process of trying to expose Mazza Mahmood. By April 1998, I'd been charged with 2 counts of delivery of counterfeit coins, alleged counterfeit coins. Coins that the Crown Prosecution Service said at the time had been forensically tested and proven to be counterfeit coins. And in 1999, at the last minute, due to bad legal advice, I changed my plea from not guilty to guilty with mitigating circumstances, that I'd been entrapped, intimidated, the evidence videos, some of them have been lost, others have been spliced together to give a misleading impression, and all the things that have come to light as reality since 2014, when British pop star Talisa Kontos-Stavlos's trial collapsed in July 2014, and the judge branded Mazza Mahmood, the fake sheikh, a liar, which ultimately led to him being tried and convicted for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice and jailed for 15 months. But it also exposed that everything I'd been saying from 1998, when my attempt to expose him backfired, in so much as it landed me in prison for a short period of time, that everything I'd said had always been true.
It doesn't.
British Broadcasting Corporation, or maybe it's boring but commercialist, or perhaps even more accurately, the British Brainwashing Corporation. It's covered by a Royal Charter here in England, which means that it's supposed to be impartial in things like politics. And yet, as people in England and around the world are increasingly realising, they're becoming more and more biased with each and every passing day. It hides a lot of dark secrets. I'll just say research on the internet the name Jimmy Savile, one of their past famous television presenters, and you'll find the links to the child sexual abuse cover-up.
What the BBC does bring to mind, though, is television in general. And one thing I'd like you to look into is to search for a US patent number. And the US patent number is 6506148. B for blue, and then number 2. And it's a patent for human nervous system manipulation through computer and television screens. This is not science fiction, it's science fact. Through the flickering of light and pixels in a screen, it is possible to affect people's brainwaves to put them into a theta state, which is arguably hypnosis, which means therefore then the messages you're being fed by that manufactured news story or the hidden subliminal storyline in a television drama or soap is more likely to go directly into your unconscious mind and affect you at a deep level.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's quite ironic, I'm going to stand a bit away from the BBC, and there's a good reason, because in 1998 I was paid a sum of money by a production company that was making a television show for the BBC called Kilroy, a morning chat show. They paid me money because it was the first day they were going to head with the Trisha show on ITV, another television station, and they wanted to win the ratings battles, so they created a publicity stunt, a television moment, a water cooler moment they might call it in America, and they paid me to streak on that live television show. So I did, I flashed my tackle, I was paid for it, then I got paid via various newspapers for the story, where I did make it known I'd been paid to do it. Despite the scandal, well, the scandal led to the BBC putting what they call an edict on me. So I was banned from ever appearing on the BBC again. Ironically, I have been on there numerous times since, especially on Newsnight, their flagship news show, after the fake Sheikh Mazza Mahmood was jailed, because they're not really bothered about the truth, they're bothered about selling newspapers and magazines or getting viewing figures. They couldn't care less about reality. The Central Criminal Court, London, many memories here, including witnessing Rupert Murdoch's disgraced journalist, the fake Sheikh Mazza Mahmood, being sentenced for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice in the trial of British pop singer Talisa Kontos-Stavlos. Suffice to say this, it may have taken over 2 decades for the truth to come out since I tried to expose him, but now the case against me then is crumbling, and proof has come out most recently that there was no evidence. The evidence the CPS say was checked forensically by the Royal Mint. The Royal Mint have now confirmed was never ever checked by them. Further evidence has come out that the police and the CPS did not disclose vital information to me, thus meaning, as we film this at the start of June 2019, I quite literally at the end of last month served my documents to the Royal Courts of Justice for my appeal in that case. So decades on, the journey for justice continues. Justice that, when I get it, will show that in 1998 I tried to make everyone aware that the newspapers are full of lies and that Mazza Mahmood is a long-time serial liar. People think the legal system is about truth and honesty. Unfortunately, you know, there's a cliched saying that justice comes to he with the best lawyer, and that is the truth. So if you've got the most money, you've got the best chance of actually being found innocent, even if you're guilty. Consequently, also people who don't have a lot of money get found guilty when years later they're found to be innocent and things are overturned. One thing about it, though, again, grandiose building to incite fear into people, to cause confusion and disorientation, a theme that you'll keep seeing all through the visual representations in this film, because it's how the powers that be control through showing, look, I'm bigger and more powerful than you, look at the size of this. That's the non-verbal suggestion they're giving you, the non-verbal hypnosis.
We're seeing more and more reports of knife crime, random knife crime in England. This is again, so it puts fear into people. Places getting more and more, you know, dangerous because there's less and less police. Oh no, what's going on? And it's that fight, flight and freeze that people are in the fear of, the disorientated, the confused. They go into theta state. They're hypnotized again, and they will take in whatever messages are fed to them. Also, that's the problem there. Then they're going to offer up a solution, which is going to, down the line, be that we have less freedom, that people can be stopped and searched more randomly to avoid knife crime. And then the populace accept this message to the point where they go, why aren't we getting more of that then? To the point where they're begging for the freedoms to be taken away, their privacy to be taken away. Now, I can't sit here and say that every person involved in the legal industry is corrupt, of course not. The majority of them are well-meaning people who are there, and some people do amazing work to set new laws that are in the interest of the mass populace. But sadly, largely laws are brought in by money people and powerful people, and unfortunately when you look really close into it, there also seems to be suggested evidence that maybe some elements of the legal system are corrupt. Food for thought, seriously, check it out for yourself. Courts and the legal system are quite often there to protect the powerful people, more so than to protect us. That is why, sadly, it's very true a lot of the time. There's rare occasions where this is different, but quite often the person with the most money, who can afford the best lawyer, is the one who will win.
I think there's very, very powerful people. I think they've been billionaires and trillionaires for a long, long time, and I think they want to stay like that. I don't know if it's as concerted and organised at the top as some people think it is. Again, I would suggest that potentially it's a sort of uneasy marriage of very, very wealthy people occasionally vying for power, but not wanting to upset the apple cart too much, because essentially they've got it pretty good. But overall, there's an attitude that the majority of people are to be spectators on the world, and they're not to be involved in anything of any importance or decision making or anything like that. I also think that generally they don't care about anybody that isn't of a similar level to them.
Finally, people are starting to wake up, people are starting to use their voice. This, your phone, your device, has become almost like the mark of the beast in the Bible, that it will be in their palm, they will have the mark of the beast. Yeah, it's addiction, it's control, it's social approval, wanting to see how many likes you've got on Facebook on your last post. Oh dear, 20 minutes has gone by, has somebody shared me video? Because it makes you feel good inside, it makes you feel worthwhile. Well, you know what? You can feel worthwhile by sending yourself voices in your head, messages of self-worth.
Hello, welcome back. Firstly, thank you very much for everybody's support for my first statement as a family doctor about the rollout of 5G and my stance. So tremendous feedback, thank you very much. So this is a statement from me, Dr. Robin Kelly. I'm a London qualified medical doctor of 44 years standing. I've spent the past 2 years or so researching the effects of various electromagnetic frequencies, including non-ionising radio frequencies. So what is being proposed and is already being rolled out in the 5th generation of 5G is a significant increase of intensity and frequency of radiation into millimetre waves, able to carry considerably more information and with a considerably shorter lag time. Almost instantaneous. This is deemed essential by the industries for competitive business networking, better gaming, and virtual reality experiences devoid of motion sickness. It also provides the necessary electromagnetic field enveloping background for the coming Internet of Things. The bottom line, though, is that there have been no independent scientific studies showing that the proposed rollout, already happening in certain areas of the world, is safe. Without safety studies, then humans and animals exposed to this new mix of frequencies become the lab rats, or as the Minister of Environment in Brussels named us, guinea pigs. The clear fact is that by increasing the frequencies, intensities and the pulse nature of electromagnetic waves impacting on our bodies, we are going to go into unknown territory. The independent scientists who have studied the effects of existing radiation have expressed deep concerns about this, extrapolating that this is a very dangerous move. An international moratorium of scientists and physicians are calling for a halt to the rollout of 5G, citing the precautionary principle, which forms the basis of good health science. In other words, first do no harm. Just one example of a mainstream report on 5G, and this is from the New York Times. Your 5G phone won't hurt you, but Russia wants you to think otherwise. So your 5G won't hurt you. So they're transfixed with this idea that as long as the 5G doesn't burn your skin, which is the only safety levels that have been checked, then that's all right. In fact, if it did cause discomfort, then you'd get out of the way of it and complain. So how has this been allowed to happen? How come commercial interests have been allowed to advance to this late stage while common sense peer-reviewed scientists are being ignored? The answer, sadly, is that these committees carry members with blatant conflicts of interest. In New Zealand, for instance, the government refuses to name the committee members, advising the government on this, even after a request through the Official Information Act. However, further delving shows a predominance of industry reps. Only 3 scientists, and they are epidemiologists. No biologists, no biochemists, no biophysicists, no physiologists, no physicians. In other words, the industry lobbyists are in control, and real independent science is being ignored. And above the cliffs, there could be an atmosphere more poisonous than anything we have ever encountered before here on Earth. And as any doctor worth his salt, or her salt, would agree with Benjamin Franklin, who said this, that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure.
Research something called Agenda 21. It's to do with population control, or if we use a slightly more negative word, genocide. In other words, allowing people to die, and maybe even sanctioning the murder of, although it would be search about EHF frequencies, RF/EMF frequencies, 5G, millimetre wave and the dangers thereof. Years ago, even in a book on stage hypnosis that I read when I was younger, a book called The Encyclopedia of Stage Hypnosis by Orman McGill, it taught you how to make what he called an audio oscillator. This was a device that basically vibrated and created a sound on a level that was human beings were not consciously aware of, but that stimulated the brain to put you into a state of theta, which is hypnosis and makes you more suggestible. Such devices we know exist and can be connected to lampposts in major towns and cities, so that you can't consciously hear it, but if it's switched on, it repels you from that area, and they use it for crowd dispersal and crowd control and keeping gangs away from certain areas.
However, they are not well understood or documented. Well, there are 2,000 papers that have documented this. Do we understand them? No. The whole point of this is do not roll out 5G until we understand these mechanisms. That's the whole point.
So, Newton, the monument, this is the British Library in London. But you know, libraries, there's an old saying, if you want to hide a secret, publish it in a book. So many people leave school and they stop reading, they stop learning, or they get conditioned into reading fiction or stuff that a lot of so-called reality books are actually fiction because they're written by the authorities, the controlling powers that want you to believe their agenda and their version of things. History is a prime example. This place has got books from all over the world, including things that are banned, that you can't buy. Why ban a book? We're supposed to have freedom of speech, unless of course it becomes too obvious and it goes against what the people at the top of the tree want you to believe.
When you go into education, or as it's quite often, well, I prefer to call it the indoctrination system, unless you're in a position where you're in the top echelons of the financial and social classes, where you may end up one day in Oxford or Cambridge or Eton, where most politicians are pulled from later in life. Unless you're in one of those social classes loosely connected to the bloodlines somewhere, however distantly, that run the world, then the chances are that you won't be going to a private fee-paying school where there is more, shall we say, a more element of control over what you learn. I sum it up as this: school, look at it. It's all about what you're really learning. It's to memorise information. Memorise, recall, repeat. In exams, you get questions, you've got to remember what you've learned, recall it, repeat it, but in your own words, which is being obedient, because you follow the authority figure. What they've done right is they've memorised and learned what they were told, they've then recalled it and repeated it under the instruction of the authority figure telling them to. And then when they get rewarded by the tick or the star or well done, pat on the back, and they feel good, they attach the emotion of it feels good to what? Follow the authority figure, be obedient, do what they say, memorise, repeat, follow, recall.
It truly is the powers that be, and then the power filters down to the people who don't know what's truly going on because they've been brainwashed. So many things are changing every day that when you dig down, the word history, for example, his story, the winner of a fight is the one who tells the story that people come to believe, but it doesn't always tell you the total truth.
Well, with any war, really, you've got to do several things. You've got to create an enemy, and you've got to demonise the enemy, and you've got to get rid of all the complicated socio-economic, political reasons why that war's happening. For example, if you're talking about the First World War, don't talk about the Orient Express and the fact that all of a sudden, like Germany could get oil from the Middle East. No. It was the Hun, or it was the invasion of Belgium, or whatever. You have to demonize these people, and this is done through propaganda. You've then got to convince two sets of people that what they're doing is right. You've got to essentially get the tacit approval from people at home that go, even though war is a horrible thing, this is a justified war. You get this concept of the Great War, the Good War, the Second World War being a good war. I'm not entirely convinced that it is. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. And then you've got to get the people who are actually going to do the killing to want to do the killing, and that means in a practical sense and in a moral sense. And in a moral sense, basically, you've got to, as I say, demonize them, position themselves as the heroes, and convince them that their sacrificing, going so far as even to sacrifice their life, is a worthy cause.
It's a crying shame that so many people have died in wars, and I'm not just talking World War I and World War II. There's so many different wars and conflicts that don't even get reported in the news media. But you know, the powers that be hold it up that it's a good, valiant thing to do, to go and serve for your country, to fight, to potentially put your life on the line, to protect your loved ones and your nation. But think deeper. Who are you really protecting? The powers that be. Dig even deeper, and unfortunately you find the horrifying truth that the real powers that be funded both sides of the major wars. They supplied weapons to our so-called enemies. They funded the deaths. They funded the atrocities. They are arguably responsible for the death of their own civilians indirectly.
War is a racket, to quote someone who knows more about it than me, and it creates loads and loads of opportunities for people to abandon their morals and make money. For example, in certain elements of the trenches in the First World War, when they got there, when the war was over and people examined it, they realised that they were made with British concrete. And there's also sort of examples of, you know, American oil companies providing materials and petrol and etc., to ensure that the Nazi war machine continued to be a functioning effort because they were making money off of it.
Look at the bigger picture. Dig deep. It's not good to go and fight at war. But we're given the impression by memorials and things that it's something to look. It's terrible these people died, but memorials also give a subliminal impression that it's a good thing to do to go to war. It never is. It never is. Look, who stands to gain? Quite often it's about power, money, control, or both. So they play on people's pre-consisting, because obviously people come from different environments, so because of that they will feel and think different things. So they will, rather than helping people set free and teaching them, control your mind, be nicer with people, love one another, look after each other, and if people did, they'd end up kind of becoming more alike in their end aims, because everyone would have the similar outcome aims of peace and love, calmness, and, you know, all good things. So no, what they do is they play on this person's insecurities, and they have a party that stands for this, and these people go for that, and these people over here follow a different party, and they have all these different parties, so that people by voting have to disagree with somebody else. Disagreement, and then that can cause arguments, and that can cause disorientation and confusion and debates and arguments and news that distracts from everything else that's going on, so that people don't band together. Well, it's all happening today. Here we are at Buckingham Palace. Yes, the Royal Palace, where Her Maj lives, the Queen. The Queen, do some research. Real name, Saxe-Gothenburg. Changed it to Windsor to sound more British. Actually, background, German. How interesting. And yet we fought a war against Germany. And the irony of it is, our head of state is of German heritage. Things in Parliament have to be signed with royal assent. At the end of the day, the puppet master, one of them, for the powers that be, behind us right now, especially because Donald Trump's over here doing a visit.
I mean, there's obviously, historically, the Queen, the bloodline of the Queen that we've got at the minute, isn't the bloodline of the Queen we had 200, 300 years ago. You know, that's constantly been chopping and changing. I think it's very, very powerful people. I think they've been billionaires and trillionaires for a long, long time, and I think they want to stay like that. And again, I think this ties into what we were talking about earlier. I think a lot of people at the top feel that most people aren't capable of making sensible decisions for their own life. And I don't agree with that at all. But I think that that's how they convince themselves that they are the benevolent rulers, that they've been put in this position, and they have almost a duty to do this. And I also think that generally they don't care about anybody that isn't of a similar level to them.
This filters all the way down through secret societies, through the bloodlines, and the kind of only bit that we get a glimpse of or see is royalty. They're held up as a respectable authority figure to look at, something to be idolised and praised, so they become tourist attraction. Go and look at the palace. Go and spend money on looking at the palaces, and you know they're used as distractions from what's going on behind the scenes, so that we're supposed to get all excited about the fact there's going to be a new royal baby born. It's just another baby, for Christ's sake. You know, it's no coincidence that the current president of the United States of America in May 2019, Donald Trump, is albeit a very distant cousin of the Queen of England, but is provably a distant cousin nonetheless. He's part of that bloodline family. And if you look back through other presidents and high-ranking people, this happens again and again.
This is an example. You don't need to go to this extreme, but when people band together, there is a power, there is an energy. And the more that people research things, the more they put the foot down against nuclear weapons, against certain political agendas to control and manipulate people. Whatever it is, the point, the bottom line is research for yourself. Don't harm people. Do it peacefully, but actually do something.
The higher you go, the sort of, like, for example, at the minute, like, I'm looking at the Heritage Foundation, which is very, very elite families and elite businesses, and they seem to have an incredible sort of control over who gets elected in American presidents, or who's the Republican candidacy. Now, that's incredible that a think tank has that amount of influence over who the candidate is. Recently, Donald Trump essentially had to audition in front of the Heritage Foundation, and also the CNP, which is a higher level of the Heritage Foundation, in order for him to be accepted as the candidate. They were originally backing a gentleman called Ted Cruz, who was at the request of a billionaire called Robert Mercer, and Steve Bannon. But halfway through, they realised that Trump had got a huge amount of free press from the Hillary campaign. He was a very, very sort of public figure. He'd got television, and he was very, very well known. And they realised that they could utilise that in order to get brand identity and in order to sell this guy. And Trump had to audition in front of the Heritage Foundation and the CNP and essentially take on board what they wanted for his policies. And only when he agreed to have an anti-abortion, anti-LGBT, tax cuts for the rich, pro-military, anti-climate change, pro-big oil policy mandate, did they agree to back him?
If you like, the people in the Houses of Parliament, when you study and look deep into the stuff we've looked at, ultimately do, generally speaking, what they're told to do. It's a pantomime, it's a puppet show. There's people pulling their strings behind the scenes. People such as Rupert Murdoch, the media mogul. Because, you know, when a politician upsets the media or upsets one of these powerful people, suddenly out the cupboard, almost instantly, comes these photographs or these confessions that prove that they've been having an affair or that they're homosexual when they claim to be, you know, a straight family man. Something comes out to embarrass them, discredit them, and ruin their career.
The Houses of Parliament, this is where the circus is run in England. In America, of course, you've got the White House. Interestingly, today as we film this, the current president of America, Donald Trump, former reality TV star and businessman. Yeah, we live in a world now where a former reality TV star, The Apprentice show, as it's called in England, or in America it was called something different. But Donald Trump was the guy who said, you're hired or you're fired. He's running America, apparently. It's ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous. And the circus is run here in England, Houses of Parliament. You know, they're hand in hand with the media. Murdoch's always backed the winning horses, as have the other media. They manipulate the mass populace. But look at things. If you research, you'll find when there's some kind of news story that captures the national interest, everyone's talking about that news story, and then it distracts from the fact that they're passing new laws behind the doors in there. And if you dig deep, you see that take away more and more of your freedoms, but the public don't kick up a stink because it doesn't get reported by the media. They don't find out about it. They get to find out about some false flag event, some terrorist incident that's occurred conveniently on the same day as laws are being passed in there, Houses of Parliament or the House of Commons or House of Lords, to take away more and more of your freedoms.
Why do none of these nationalists promote nationalist ideas? Why do none of them promote what's brilliant about England or what's brilliant about America or what's brilliant about... All they do is they talk about this threat of it being taken away, and they don't define what it is, because if you define what it is, people are going to disagree with you. Make America great again. What is America? What is America? Is it a corporation? Is it California? Is it New York? Is it this ideology? Is it this ideology? What does making do? Making, who's going to do it? You? Great. What does great involve? Does great mean that it's economically powerful? Does great mean that it's the kindest planet on country on the planet? What do any of these words mean? And again, when was it great? Now, what that's harking back to is, again, this concept of an imagined past, a rose-tinted past that never really existed. That's just beyond the horizon, and if only we could get back to that. And that's vitally, vitally important, because it ties into this concept of cults. You're creating this mythic idea that is unachievable.
It's a corrupt system. I mean, we're only going to mention things like Kennedy assassination and things to know that when you look deep, MK Ultra, Mind Control Ultra was definitely involved. I'm not saying that they actually mind controlled somebody to commit the assassination, but I do believe they mind controlled somebody to look like they'd done the assassination. I don't believe it was the bullet from their gun that did it, but they ended up being mind controlled into doing what they thought was an assassination, albeit they made sure nothing went wrong by doing it themselves, and this person becomes a fall guy or a patsy. And why would you want to get rid of certain presidents? Well, if that president wants to get rid of the banking system the way it was known and make it more honest so that people benefit as a mass populace, then obviously that's not in the interest of the bankers and the powerful bloodlines and families that control the world. So you're suddenly going to disappear.
The Bilderberg appears to be, I mean, I don't really know, I've never been, but the Bilderberg appears to be where they basically meet and chat about these policies. Like the think tanks, like the CMP and the Heritage Foundation and the Brookings Institute and CFR perhaps, and others, things like that, seem to be where these very, very wealthy people get together and come up with these policies. So it's a tangled web. I'd be lying if I said I'd got to the top of it. I know people want it to be 13 families and a united idea of a one world government and slowly moving towards this idea of, like, you know, there's a definite ending, and I don't think there is. I think it's more like the gods of Olympus, where they're warring and they're incompetent. The CNP was started by Tim LaHaye. Tim LaHaye was also John Birch and wrote the series of books The Left Behind, you know, where the rapture happens and everyone gets taken up to heaven. They strongly believe that you must destroy the temple in Israel and rebuild the temple in Israel so that Jesus can come back and the world can end. I know that sounds silly because this is the 21st century, but I'm telling you, that appears to be one of the driving ideologies behind these very, very, very powerful people.
So when you look, the spider's web interlinks all over the place and gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and more scary every single blinking step of the way.
We shall assume that what each man does is based not on direct and certain knowledge, but on pictures made by himself or given to him. If his atlas tells him that the world is flat, he will not sail near what he believes to be the edge of the planet for fear of falling off. If his maps include a fountain of eternal youth, a Ponce de Leon will go in quest of it. If someone digs up yellow dirt that looks like gold, he will, for a time, act exactly as if he had found gold. The way in which the world is imagined determines at any particular moment what men will do.
Because if we were to start to band together, love one another, and go for a mutual aim of a world where there was abundance for everyone, there's more than enough money or resources in the world, because money's just an illusion, there's more than enough resources in the world for everyone to live like millionaires. But you don't need £1 million to live like a millionaire, because what is a true millionaire? Someone who can feel happy, calm, relaxed, and enjoy every moment of life, living in the now rather than being stuck in the past or fearing the future.
So it's about making decisions that are right for you. And to be honest, I'm not the one to tell you this, because I'm not you. I don't know what you want, and I don't know what other people want. I don't know your personal situation. I don't know what makes you happy. I think it's literally about trying to find a path that is suitable for you.
How would I like to be remembered?
And listen to the wind as it whispers in your ear.
As somebody who in some small way just helped the world to be a better place, I suppose.
Let's say please for Jonathan Royle.
Your friends are waiting there as you make your way ahead to heaven's door, and listen to the wind as it whispers in your ear. The time that you must leave is here. The time that you must leave is here.
Okay, this might be a bit noisy, but as you look around, what's happening right now on the 3rd of June 2019 as Donald Trump, the current president of the USA, visits England, people have gathered at Buckingham Palace for a peaceful protest to put resistance against nuclear arms and similar things. And that's what it's about, people actually saying no, people peacefully protesting and taking control and going, no, I don't have to listen to you because you're the perceived authority figure. If enough of us peacefully protest, then sooner or later we will have strength in numbers.